You're jumping right in at the perfect time, as Dragon right now is situated right at the hatchway, at the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module. Since it was captured at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern Time, robotics flight controllers have maneuvered Dragon using that Canadarm to its position where it now sits. In the time between, as they do take about 2 hours to maneuver Dragon over, they do a number of different checkouts, including a full survey of that common berthing mechanism with the OSO here in Mission Control, and a number of the back room, including the mission evaluation room, taking a look at all of the different attachment points on that common berthing mechanism, looking for any FOD or foreign object debris or any issues with any of the connections. Seeing nothing, they elected to press forward. The crew right now in exercise constraints, so not exercising on board as they do this final lining up and attaching to the International Space Station. At this point, the robotic arm has gone into its limp mode, so no longer maneuvering. Dragon is in the ready to latch position, and pretty soon we'll be getting the second stage capture. So that is what will firmly attach Dragon to the International Space Station. There are 4 latches on that common berthing mechanism and 16 bolts, also known as A-bolts. And once those are in place, Dragon will be firmly attached, where it'll spend the next month attached to the International Space Station. It's delivering about 5,700 pounds of cargo to the station crew of Expedition 61, who again earlier this morning captured Dragon at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern. Once we get Dragon attached here, they'll be able to begin moving through the different steps to get closer to opening up the hatch into Dragon. They have a number of steps, including something called vestibule pressurization. So that's actually, the vestibule is the space between the Dragon hatch and the hatch on station. And they'll be able to actually introduce atmosphere in there. Normally both of those hatchways exposed to the vacuum of space. They'll pressurize that small space in between, and then eventually get ready to open the hatch on the station side and then on Dragon itself. We've been ahead of the timeline throughout the day, being captured about 25 minutes early. And right now we're actually about an hour and a half ahead of the expected final install time. So everything running very smoothly so far this morning. Again, right now you're looking at Dragon. It's already at its attachment point on the Earth-facing side of Node 2, the Harmony module. And right now we're just standing by for second stage capture. And so very shortly they're going to start driving these 16 bolts that are going to firmly hold Dragon in place for the next month or so. And then once that is complete, Dragon will be attached. Again, all of this action at this point being driven by flight controllers down here on the ground. Once the crew is done capturing the spacecraft, they can go off to other things, while robotics flight controllers, both here in Houston and in partnership with those up in Canada, were responsible for actually sending the commands up to the robotic arm to slowly maneuver it into place. And then, again, our flight controllers down here are the ones actually going to be sending commands to the space station to drive those bolts in place.
Station Houston on 2 for Jessica when available.
The station right now just passing over the border between Spain and France as it flies in an orbital daytime. About 259 statute miles over Europe right now. It's going to continue over France, eventually passing over Switzerland, southern Germany, Austria, right over to the north of Slovakia, out over Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and then eventually over Russia. Again, you're looking at the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. This is going to be the third time this particular Dragon has been attached to the station, having previously delivered supplies on SpaceX's CRS-6 and CRS-11 missions. That CRS-6 was the first visit to the space station for this capsule, coming back in April of 2015. And it then returned on that SpaceX 11 mission in June of 2017. Per the schedule right now, this will actually be the second to last visit of this form of Dragon that you're looking at right now. It's one of the more significant departures to the new Dragon will be the disappearance of those large solar arrays, which, when unfurled, give Dragon a wingspan of about 54 feet.
Give you guys a heads up here that now it's looking like we are about an hour and a half ahead of schedule for the Dragon items. So based on what we're looking at the timeline here, it's possible that you could probably get into your leak check activity just after the midday meal. We'll keep you apprised on that, but just wanted to give you a heads up on where we're at for the day.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, please keep us posted. And the RWS teardown, do you want me to wait with that, or could that be done also before?
Yeah, Jessica, not ready for that quite yet, but yes, we do expect that you'll probably be able to get into that a little early, and we'll just keep you apprised when we're ready for that.
Okay, sounds good.
And you were just hearing the Capcom Scott Zagatti talking to Jessica Meir on board the International Space Station. She's going to be on the hook for doing some leak checks of, again, the vestibule, that space between the hatchway on Node 2 and Dragon's hatch. As you heard, the team's running ahead of schedule as they've been doing all morning. Right now, about an hour and a half of when we were expected to be finished with this final Stage 2 capture, as it's known, but that's really just the final endpoint of Dragon being berthed or firmly attached to the International Space Station. We're just waiting for the driving of those 16 bolts that will hold it securely in place. For those familiar with a lot of space station operations, there are typically two different ways that visiting vehicles are attached to the station, either a docking or a berthing. This morning we're seeing the berthing, and that involves a vehicle arriving, being captured with a robotic arm, so you need a crew member on board the station to be in the loop, and then it gets maneuvered and it gets attached to what's known as a common berthing mechanism. These are actually the exact same hatchways that you would find in between the different modules of the space station itself. They're much larger typically than a docking port, so for things like cargo flights, you're able to fly much larger items that can fit through the hatchway. It is a little bit of a slower process, taking a lot longer to actually get attached, and then the same in reverse when it's time for it to depart. You need a crew member on board to help close everything out and then get the vehicle on its way. We will be seeing a docking, though, tomorrow morning. Those can be automated with crew in or out of the loop, crew typically acting as a backup for docking, especially with the Russian progress. The Russian cosmonauts will be standing by to take manual control should they need to. Docking's going a lot quicker, though. Docking's obviously used for all crewed vehicles, so you'll see that for not only the Russian Soyuz and the Progress, but also for the upcoming U.S. commercial crew vehicles. Both Boeing and SpaceX's spacecraft will be docking as opposed to the berthing. Again, for the advantage of being a much faster process than berthing, and not needing a crew member on board the space station to actually complete a docking. However, once SpaceX starts flying on the CRS-2 contract, which is expected to start on SpaceX's 21st resupply mission, they'll be switching over to a new version of the Dragon spacecraft. It's largely going to mirror the crewed version, where it will be docking instead of berthing. We'll also have the different solar array configuration, where the solar cells will actually be wrapped around the trunk of the vehicle itself. But for now, we are just waiting for that second stage capture to get this Dragon attached in place. We are getting word now on the flight control loops here in Mission Control Houston that those bolts are starting to drive again. There's 16 in total. They're also referred to as A bolts. And once those are all in place, second stage capture will be complete. And Dragon will be attached to the bottom of the Node 2, also known as the Harmony node, for the next month or so. So those bolts are driving, and now we're just going to stand by. And those you typically take about 5 to 7 minutes to get in place. And Dragon will be attached to the space station. And this is Mission Control Houston. Those A-bolts continuing to drive. So you're looking at Dragon. It's in place at the common berthing mechanism on the bottom of Node 2, the Harmony module. And right now those 16 bolts are driving to firmly fix Dragon in place where it's going to remain for the next month. And once we get confirmation that all those bolts are in place, our job will be done for today and Dragon will be attached. Then it'll be back over to the crew to start getting ready to open up the hatch on Dragon. Jessica Meir on board is going to be the one on point for doing a series of leak checks on the vestibule. That's the space between the hatch on station and the hatch on Dragon. They'll need to make sure that it's leak-free before they move forward with actually opening up any of the hatches. They actually introduce some atmosphere into that area between the two, which is normally exposed to the vacuum of space. And obviously, once the pressure is equalized, you're able to open up the hatch without any issues. The crew will have some initial outfitting, and then they'll be ready to move inside of Dragon and actually start unloading some cargo right away before they wrap up their day today. These SpaceX missions delivering a large amount of science, typically. This one in particular, delivering over a ton of science hardware and experiment samples to the Expedition 61 crew. And it's going to kick off several weeks for these crew members. That's really going to refocus a lot of their time to this science work. The crew members completing a lot of spacewalks and other operational activities over the last few weeks. Now going to be in science mode over the coming weeks as they have a lot of sortie science that's flying up and down on SpaceX. And so they'll have a clock to get a lot of that done, or all of that done, before they pack SpaceX back up with about 3,600 pounds of cargo inside Dragon to bring it back home. So again, those 16 bolts continuing to drive. Should be getting these A-bolts done in the next few moments. And this is Mission Control Houston. We did just get the confirmation that those A-bolts are in place, and that means SpaceX's Dragon now firmly bolted to the International Space Station. That final bolt loading coming complete at 6:47 a.m. Central Time, 7:47 a.m. Eastern Time, while the station was flying 262 statute miles over Kazakhstan. Actually, just to the northeast of Baikonur, where crew members and Progress resupply crafts launched to the International Space Station. But with that Dragon now attached, that's again going to kick off a couple of steps for the crew on board.
A-bolts are complete, so that relieves all of our exercise constraints. So you guys can exercise away.
Okay, copy. That's good news. Thanks for passing it along.
No problem.
And that call right there, just letting the crew know that Dragon is attached, so those exercise constraints are no longer in place. And again, that's going to kick off a couple of hours of activities for the crew to actually get Dragon ready to get the hatch opened up. Jessica Mears is going to be on tap for doing the leak checks of the vestibule, that space between the station hatch and the Dragon hatch. They'll get that outfitted and then eventually get the hatch open a little bit later today. Then the entire crew is going to be involved in getting some of the cargo out, getting the hatch open. Again, kicking off about 4 weeks of science investigations on board the space station newly delivered on Dragon until it's time for the capsule to unberth, depart, and come home in early January. But again, one more time, that berthing time coming at 6:47 a.m. Central Time, 7:47 a.m. Eastern, just 262 statute miles in altitude over Kazakhstan. And so with that, one cargo ship now arrived at the International Space Station, but as we said a little bit earlier, things are not done for the Expedition 61 crew in welcoming new cargo ships. Just less than 24 hours from now, actually 21 hours, 46 minutes, and 40 seconds from now, the Progress 74 spacecraft, which launched a few days ago, is scheduled to arrive to the International Space Station. We'll, of course, be bringing you live coverage that's going to kick off at 3:45 a.m. Central Time, 4:45 a.m. Eastern, as Progress makes its automated approach and docking to the Piers docking compartment on the station. A docking scheduled for 4:38 a.m. Central Time, 5:38 a.m. Eastern, delivering another couple of tons of cargo, water, fuel to the International Space Station and the Expedition 61 crew. So with that, I want to thank you for waking up early. It was a beautiful flight to see Dragon make its way up to the station this morning, arriving and being captured well ahead of time, and now it's all a little over an hour and a half ahead of schedule. So a new Dragon on board, a new Progress arriving tomorrow, and another busy couple of weeks to close out 2019 for the Expedition 61 crew aboard the International Space Station. So be sure to wake up early again if you're in the U.S. and watch that Progress arrive tomorrow. And as always, keep up with everything happening on board the International Space Station at nasa.gov/station, across our various social media channels, and of course, go follow the crew on social media for a daily look at life on board the orbiting laboratory. With that, though, we will sign off one last time for today. This is Mission Control Houston.